This is Tar Heel Talk, an in-depth look at the issues and people making news in North Carolina. Here's your host, Sonya Williams.
Each year, more than 100,000 children are reported as being abused or neglected in North Carolina. Today's show focuses on an organization working to prevent child abuse and neglect and to provide comprehensive care and assistance to victims and their families. It's called SAFEchild, and joining me now is Kristen Duranje, Director of the new SAFEchild Advocacy Center, and Melanie Shakita, Assistant District Attorney with the Wake County District Attorney's Office. Welcome to Tar Heel Talk.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Now, before we talk about the new SAFEchild Advocacy Center, let's first learn a little bit more about the organization itself. Kristen, tell us a little bit about SAFEchild and its mission.
Well, SAFEchild was established in 1992, so almost 19 years ago. And we were established to fill a gap of services in Wake County, which we've stayed true to that mission for all of these years by growing and expanding our programs to what the community has needed. And all of our programs are geared towards preventing child abuse, and we do that in different ways.
Okay, and you provide a number of programs and services.
Exactly.
Tell us a little bit about those services.
We have home-based services and group-based services, school-based services, and now we have a center-based service. And our goal is to really focus on the strengths of the family and build that family in whatever way they need to have some support. And every family has different challenges, every family has different strengths, and we try to meet each family where they are and help them along the process of taking care of their children.
Absolutely. I think it's important for our viewers to understand, and really for the public in general to understand what constitutes abuse, because we all hear about the worst case scenario where you have a child who is killed by a parent or a caregiver, and then we also hear stories about parents being arrested for spanking their child in public. So what are the actions and behaviors, Melanie, that constitute child abuse?
Well, I think you sort of touched on it. There's varying kinds. There are the kinds that lead to serious injury or death, and then there are the kinds that may be an excessive punishment. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not the goal of our office at the Wake County District Attorney's Office to punish parents for appropriate discipline. Right. It's when it exceeds that boundary that it becomes abusive. And so there are varying ranges of abuse, from, you know, a simple strike to repeated physical abuse, and then there's even punishment or charges that are potentials for when children are severely neglected, when their most basic needs aren't being met, when they're malnutrition, when they have malnutrition, mm-hmm. or when they, you know, are left alone, and those types of things. So there's really a wide range of different types of behaviors, or even lack of behaviors on the part of parents, that can constitute some sort of abuse or neglect that rises to the level of abuse.
Okay. And Kristen, this is where the new SAFEchild Advocacy Center will come into play, because you will support the children who are actually abused and their families.
The children that come to our center come for children's medical evaluations, and these are children where we're concerned that sexual or physical abuse may have occurred in their life. And so what we're trying to do is to make sure that we can help figure out what is going on, what has happened, have an opportunity for the child to share their story with us so we can best help them meet their needs and begin the healing process for them.
And this new SAFEchild Advocacy Center has been a long time in the making, many years. It's the result of many years of planning and working. Melanie, tell us a little bit about how we got to this point of the Child Advocacy Center and what it took to get there.
Well, child advocacy centers have a lot of components to them. There are several things that the SAFEchild Advocacy Center has incorporated that we've been doing in Wake County for a long time. We, for years, I think since the early 1990s, have had what's called a multidisciplinary team, where once a month was when we were meeting, and now it's twice a month. Mm-hmm. We would meet together with local professionals, medical professionals, law enforcement officers, social workers, mental health treatment workers if they were involved with the family, the district attorney's office, and we would sit down as a group, discuss specific cases where there were concerns for abuse, to decide, one, one component would be whether criminal charges should be taken out, obviously, but other components were to make sure that the children were receiving services that they needed. And so we've been doing that for a long time. But because I think part of the problem in Wake County, which most people would not see as a problem, is we have so many resources in Wake County that can meet the needs for children. Often we were duplicating services, or children and families didn't know what was out there because there were so many. So about 5 or 6 years ago, we got together a planning committee with folks from Wake Med, from our office, from local law enforcement agencies, from community partners in the mental health field, and sat down and figured out how we could come together to create a community-based center where everyone had input. And so we weren't overusing some resources, duplicating others, and that we could provide consistent, comprehensive services for the children and their families. So it's been probably about 5 years that we've been working on it, and in the last year or so, SAFEchild had taken us sort of under their umbrella for what they were already providing for children and families in the community, and really helped to make this a reality. So it's been a long time in coming, but we're very excited.
Now, what can we expect from this new Child Advocacy Center?
Well, as I kind of mentioned earlier, it's really broadened and deepened our mission as far as strengthening families in Wake County. And, no matter how much we love our children are challenging to raise. They present new obstacles to parents every single day, and children also change. What a 2-year-old looks like is very different to what that child looks like when they're 12, and so we try to partner with families in helping them adjust to the challenges that come about daily and just throughout a child's development. And so what we're able to do now is we have early intervention strategies to prevent child abuse from ever happening, and that's by working with first-time moms and their baby, and mentoring that first-time mom and that baby during that critical first year of life. And we have other programs that strengthen families along the way. But we also know that no matter what we have out there in the community, abuse still happens. We can't get, unfortunately, to every family, and so we still need to help those children that have been abused. We need to keep them safe. We need to make sure that they're not abused again. We need to make sure that those that are offending against children do not have access to them any longer. And then we also need to make sure that other children in the neighborhood, other children in the family are safe. And so SAFEchild could have really sat back and been comfortable in the role that we had, and we were doing great work, and we're continuing to work with those programs that we've had all these years. We haven't eliminated any of them. We've just gotten a little more brave and a little bit more bold in our approach, and realizing that we need to be out there in primary intervention and secondary and tertiary intervention for preventing abuse.
How can people find out more information about SAFEchild?
Well, we're here located in Wake County, and we have our main location, which is near NC State University, and the number there is 743-6140. And then our advocacy center is actually a separate facility that's behind Wake Med Health and Hospitals off of New Bern Avenue. And the number there is 231-5515.
And of course, they can always log on to your website, safechildnc.org, and certainly find out a wealth of information about the organization there. We're going to take a break. We'll talk more in just a minute.
Thank you.
Up next, how the SAFEchild Advocacy Center is helping children who have been abused and also supporting their families. Tar Heel Talk will continue after these messages. Today we're taking a closer look at child abuse in North Carolina and efforts underway to both prevent it and to provide assistance and support to victims and their families. With us again is Kristen Duranje, Director of the SAFEchild Advocacy Center, and Melanie Shakita, Assistant District Attorney for Wake County. Now, before the break we were talking about child abuse, and I think at the beginning of the show I said that the number of children who are reported as being either abused or neglected in North Carolina is well over 100,000 per year. That's a huge number when you talk about children. How does that number play out, or how do the numbers play out when we talk about Wake County and the number of children who have been reported as being either abused or neglected?
Well, the sad part of that reality is that number of 100,000 is actually not an accurate number, because we do know that child abuse goes underreported, and it's something that people have a hard time talking about. For whatever reason, people like to look the other way instead of reach out a helping hand and to see how they can get involved and help a family, a child, a caretaker that might be struggling. And so, so that's the sad part about that number. While it seems very large, we know the number is actually much larger than that. Here in our community in Wake County, last year, almost 8,000 children were reported as being abused or neglected. So.
And Melanie, as the Assistant District Attorney in Wake County, part of your job is to prosecute those who have been accused of abusing a child. Talk a little bit about your role in this process in terms of helping victims and some of the things that you've seen over the years.
Well, I'm actually one of 3 prosecutors that is in the Special Victims Unit, and all we do is focus on sexual assaults with adults and also on children. So our boss, the elected DA, Colin Willoughby, has really seen a need to focus on these types of prosecutions, recognizing, again, a lot of people don't want to talk about them. Often they're difficult to talk about. It's difficult to get children to talk about these types of things. So we have focused on trying to be consistent within our office, but each year anywhere from 125 to 200 cases that are just abuse against children, whether it's sexual abuse or physical abuse, are charged in Wake County and prosecuted by our office. Obviously, as Kristen said, you know, the number is much more significant, and for any number of reasons, it may not be a case that's able to be prosecuted, whether the child is too young, whether the perpetrator is gone and we can't have access to them, any number of reasons. But when our office gets involved, we're very fortunate to have a good working relationship, I would say, with many of the local law enforcement agencies. And so when a report comes into CPS or Child Protective Services and law enforcement, we're usually notified early on, and so we're there to provide guidance and assistance, and sometimes just to be a sounding board for the law enforcement officers who unfortunately have to be down in the trenches, so to speak, with these families, trying to figure out where they go. And often that's very difficult, because parents sometimes don't want to believe what's happening, because it's easier to not believe, especially if it's another caregiver that something like that would happen. Then they don't necessarily know how to deal with what their children are saying, which is why the SAFEchild Center is so fabulous, because they can point them into resources. So we like to get involved early on and then work with the family, sometimes even before charges are taken out, all the way through hopefully a successful prosecution.
And you talked a little bit about your work with the family, and now with the Child Advocacy Center. I know that a lot of times it can be very traumatic for a child, it can be traumatic for an adult to share their experience about what happened to them, and that's where the SAFEchild Advocacy Center will really come in to play, and the benefits there of having everyone under the same roof, so that the child doesn't have to be re-traumatized by sharing the story over and over again.
Absolutely, and I guess you can talk a little bit about kind of how that starts off.
And so what we do is we work in a well-coordinated, collaborative approach with Child Protective Services, law enforcement, the District Attorney's Office, medical professionals, mental health professionals, and these are all the different disciplines in our community that participate in the investigation of child sexual and physical abuse cases. And what was happening in the past, even though these professionals were very highly skilled and trained and cared about children, it was a child that had to go from professional to professional, different offices, to the police station, to social worker's office, and just having to the hospital, and having to not only experience just the time involved of having to navigate all of that, and if you can imagine a family being in crisis and having to figure that out, and these are all strangers talking to these families. They're not